Hello everybody and welcome to this session on using live data to address poverty in Wales. So this workshop was delivered in November 2022 for public service boards in Wales. This was the second of two workshops that we delivered on poverty for public service boards. The first one focused on our poverty review, which drew together evidence on what works to address poverty from both a strategic perspective and a sort of policy and programme perspective. And it looked across 12 domains of poverty. So that workshop recording, as well as all of the research that sits behind that, is also available on our website if you're interested in it. The focus of this session was on how public service boards and public services more broadly can use live data, or in many cases the most up-to-date data as available, to understand who's at risk of poverty and also what can be done to tackle poverty from a sort of planning and delivery perspective. So this session is an hour long and it was broken down into three sections. Firstly, we welcome Suzanne Draper and Anna Harries from Data Cymru to share their poverty dashboard. Secondly, we welcome Rob Starr from Ceredigion Public Service Board, who shares their poverty dashboard with you and how this data informs their work through their poverty subgroup. And then thirdly, there is some discussion and reflections. And if you have any questions about the recording and the workshop that we delivered, please don't hesitate to get in contact with us. You can see my colleague Greg's email address at the bottom of the screen there. Hope you enjoy this. All the best.
So I'm going to just give a quick background as to where our project came from, and then Anna will actually do the all-important demo. So, gosh, it was about probably a year, perhaps even 18 months ago now, that it came to our, we started the work on this project. We'd been approached by Anglesey in particular. I mean, obviously everybody was starting to talk about poverty more and more, and you know, we were starting to see what the beginnings of what has now become the cost of living crisis. But you know, back 18 months ago, the focus was poverty, and Anglesey had come to us and had wanted to have a very kind of quick and easy way of being able to understand what poverty looked like on the island. Just a really quick kind of overview where they could say what is going on, where are the areas of real concern, what does it look like, so that they could then obviously use that information. So I'm going to say we, but it's a very royal we. It was obviously all Anna. Did a lot of work to kind of understand what data was available, at the different geography levels, and then how we could mount that into a dashboard. And we've used Power BI in order to help them achieve what they would like to do. So we worked on that with Anglesey for months, and then at the point at which they were happy with it, we've then adjusted it, tweaked it, so that it's actually now at an all Wales level. So you can see the information at a Wales level, or you can hone down to specific authorities in most instances. In some instances, we've actually gone below local authority level, and you can look at lower super output area. The data is limited there, and that's probably one of the caveats that I'm not going to dwell on now, and we can touch on afterwards. But it's obviously all around data availability. But hopefully what you'll see is that you know, it does at least help to kind of put that information into context and help you understand what the data is trying to tell you. So on that note, I'm going to hand over to Anna.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. I almost said good morning then. So I'm just going to give you a quick overview of the poverty dashboard. So it lives on our website. We've got a section under data called dashboards, and then it's there, a view of poverty. It is also available in Welsh. I'll show you the English version today. So what we've tried to do is allow users to almost get a snapshot of some key summary information for each of the themes of poverty. So in terms of the themes of poverty, we've got income and employment, education and skills, health, community cohesion, physical environment, and material deprivation. What we've done up here then, like I said, is try to almost include some key information from each of those themes and bring them together into one data view to give local authorities a snapshot of data within their local authority. So this is the summary overview. You can see at the top here, we've included some of the WIMD information, so that's the Welsh Index of Multiple Deprivation data, just to give you an indicator of what poverty looks like. So in this case, we're looking at Angle, so you can see as we update and select a different authority, all of the information will update quite quickly. And then under each of these themes, then what we've done is include sort of key information for each of those themes. And then we've tried to include some information which will give local authorities an idea of where they sit within the range of local authorities across Wales. So that's what the tropical colours are on the front of the page. And then the arrows then are ultimately to say whether that data is going up or down based on the last set of information that you know, the last reporting period for that data. Where the arrows are sideways, it means there's no change. Where there's a dash, it means that there's no comparable information to share it with. There is information included within the tool that you can go and get some more information. So if you want a bit more detail about what the quarters mean and what the arrows mean, then you can refer to the help guides that are within the tool. So that's sort of the first view, which gives you that snapshot, like I said. And then what we've done is create you know, the same information, but you can see it. So if you wanted to see it across the 22 local authorities, you can now see that and get that quick snapshot. If you wanted to interrogate a piece of data a bit more, then you could expand it to look at that one specific data item. And you know, as you can see, so Cardiff is selected and they're highlighted pink in the chart, so you can very quickly see where they sit across Wales. The next data view we included then was to have a look at it over time. So again, it's those same, you know, 3 key pieces of information, which will, you know, help give you a flavour for that theme of poverty within your local area. Oh, sorry, I got distracted then. Yeah, so you'll be able to see that over time as well. And then what we have tried to do, and it was something that, you know, Anglesey were really keen to incorporate into the tool from the outset, was more local information. So where data does exist, we have included LSOA information. This is majority WIM data and also census information. So the census information will be more up to date. Obviously, we've got census information coming out at the moment, so that will, you know, become more relevant. But what we wanted to do here really was give local authorities the option to select this. You know, the data is so limited, they can almost customize their own local view of poverty. We actually took the decision to leave these two, so the material deprivation and the physical environment themes, to leave them empty, because there, you know, there really was not any relevant or useful information that we could find anyway, that lended itself to those themes. You know, so very specifically, there were gaps nationally around digital poverty and food poverty. So that's sort of the summary overview of the tool for those people who, you know, just want to sort of dip in and out and get some clear information quite quickly. If you want to go and interrogate the data further, then we've broken the data down into the individual themes. So you can either access them, you can see you've got these links on each of the pages. If I go back to the summary page, so you can see that they're here as well. Or if you go back to the home page, then you can access them here as well. So I'll just go to the income and employment data by local authority. And this is largely, you know, putting the power into the hands of the people. So all of the data that we've identified, you know, as being relevant for the income and employment theme is included here. So you can select which data you want to look at. You can break that down by local authority, by region, build the view. You know, if there's particular authorities that maybe you know that you're similar with, then you can build the view that you want, essentially, to, you know, to help tell that story for you. This is broken down into measures and counts, and the only reason we've done that is so that you can include Wales as a comparator under measures. And then for counts, obviously, if we included the Wales values here, it would just make everyone else very, very small. So that's why we've separated it out. But the counts information is largely, you know, the number type of data, so the more contextual information that will, you know, help to, you know, to tell that story. And then we've included a tab where relevant for local data, and this is where you can see, you know, the numbers get much smaller, but the information is there. And in the same way, you know, you can select different indicators to look at if, you know, you wanted to look at specific reporting periods. One thing I would say about the tool, you know, a lot of the data in here is quite out of date now. You know, COVID has had an impact on data availability. So some of the information in here might be monthly, particularly information around claimant counts and things like that. You know, other data then, you know, is maybe a bit more out of date than it normally would be were it not for the pandemic. So we expect that situation to improve as time goes on. And I'm just going to stop sharing my screen because I think that's it in terms of the tool. We have included a little tab as well, which, you know, includes some information about all of the data. So if you wanted to go and, you know, understand how a certain piece of information was calculated, or, you know, who publishes it or where it comes from, then that information is included as well. So that was just a very quick overview about the tool itself. In terms of how it can be useful for PSBs. So, you know, we're hoping that you find the tool useful and that it gives you a view of poverty in your local area. I would say that this is just one example of using data to tell the story of poverty. And there's a lot of, you know, of other work that's ongoing, that's going on out there at the moment. So I was just going to mention a few that we're aware of. So the Audit Wales have recently published their Time for Change Poverty in Wales report. And that looks at the challenge of poverty in Wales and how government is responding. That is the first of 3 reviews on the challenge of alleviating poverty and tackling poverty. So that work is ongoing with the Audit Office. You know, it's a good source of information. The End Child Poverty Coalition, they've recently published their data on child poverty. So that is based on DWP HMRC statistics on children in low-income families, which is the March 22 data. We're actually in the process of developing a dashboard using that information, and that will be available shortly on our website. Similarly, then we're developing a cost of living dashboard, which brings together data that relates to some of the key drivers of the cost of living crisis. And that will ultimately impact on poverty as well. So that will be available soon. And Citizens Advice as well, I wanted to mention. So they've published a dashboard which shows the numbers and the trends of people seeking advice and support on a range of topics which relate to poverty. The dashboard is updated monthly, so, you know, it is live information in that sense. And it's updated monthly, and it can help users track how the cost of living crisis is changing. They've been holding a series of briefings around that dashboard as well. And I've attended a couple, and they're, you know, really interesting and really informative, although, you know, very bleak. The message is very bleak, but I wanted to mention that as well. And then there might be other stuff, and that, you know, that's going back to what Suzanne was saying at the start, which is, you know, what we've done is ultimately, you know, a view of poverty, but that, you know, we're not saying that that's the be all and end all, and it certainly doesn't answer, you know, all the questions. So yeah, we'd welcome any feedback about what data should be included. And if there's any data available that you're using to support your work around poverty, that's not included in the tool, then, you know, please let us know and we can work to include that. And then just to say as well that, you know, the tool is very much a work in progress from our perspective. We're always looking for opportunities, you know, to work with local authorities nationally, you know, and we still have aspirations to, you know, include some local information in the tool as well to help support that. So I'll open it up for any comments or questions. I'll hand back to you, Suze.
Thanks, Anne. I was just going to do a wrap up, but I'm pretty sure you've covered absolutely everything I had on my list that I might pick up otherwise. So we'll go to questions. John, I don't know if you were first, but I've
Yeah,
seen
sorry,
another one.
I came late, so I may have missed this. Can I just check? Is it updated live, or do you update it on a monthly or whatever basis? And how do you access it?
So it's available from the homepage of our website. When we published it, we set up a monthly refresh, and I did notice this morning in going to obviously refresh myself with the tool before this demo, that it hasn't updated for the last couple of months. So that's going to be something that I look at straight after this meeting now. But it will be set to update monthly because we've got monthly information in there. Not a lot. It is only the claimant count information that's monthly, but it's, you know, we do intend for it to be updated on a monthly basis.
I've added a link to it in the chat as well.
Great,
So
thank you very much.
Okie doke. I think Rob, perhaps you were next.
Oh, thank you. It's only me. Just a quick couple of comments, really. I've obviously been looking at this quite a bit recently in preparation for the presentation today. And I have to say, my view remains very much the same. It's pretty impressive, I think, when it comes to the construction. And I think what it shows, probably more than anything, is the sheer range of data that does actually exist. So when you read the Audit Wales report, we mustn't be under any illusions. Whilst there's a few criticisms in there around the way that councils in particular need to make better use of the data that's available, that data actually does exist. There is plenty to work with. And I think that that's what your dashboard, more than anything else, actually shows. The key point, I think, is how you make use of that data. And that's the kind of, that is the $64 million question, I think, isn't it? Is the kind of doing the analysis, actually interpreting it, understanding what it means, and then, turning that into demonstrable action. And that's the thing that we've kind of been wrestling with as well. But there's no doubt about it in terms of data, it exists. And then just one final comment in passing, I really like the kind of visualizations because it does help. And we found this before. We used to have a poverty dashboard in place and everything was communicated just verbally or in a very plain sort of report. I don't get the sense that the messages got through in quite the same way. I think once you can see it on screen, it helps with understanding, and also it just kind of helps with the strength of message as well, kind of getting that across. So I thought that was really good. And I got to say, Anna, I love the reference to tropical colours. I don't know if that's an official term, but it sounded great. Thank you. Thanks.
Thanks, Rob.
Thanks, Rob. We always used to work with RAGs, didn't we? Which was red, amber, green. And then we introduced this kind of middle ground with the quarters. So we came up with a tropical theme and named it accordingly. I mean, what you said there, Rob, though, is key. And that was one of the things for us. There is so much data out there. The intention of the tool is to bring all of that information together in one place. And what I didn't show you as part of the demo, which I probably should have, is that you can very easily export that information as well. So once you've, customized your view and you've decided, what authorities you're comparing against or however you want to use it, you just click the three dots and you can export it in a table and run with it then. So it is good that all that information is available in one tool view.
Yeah, and that was partly our intention with that kind of the first view that Anna demoed, where we've kind of tried to select what is the most pertinent information for each of those themes, because there is so much data available that it can be quite unwieldy to kind of go, well, what is important? What do I need to focus on? So we did the exercise to say, okay, well, there are some people who just want that quick high level overview. So if we put that data front and center, and you don't want to go in further and interrogate the data anymore, you will get something from that initial look, and then you can, if that, raises some questions or you want to look further, then you can. But how can we make all of that data quickly and easily accessible to give you the information that you need? So hopefully that's achieved. Stephen.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, just going to come in as well and just kind of say about some of the data that's on here. I've been, while listening to the presentation, I've been kind of looking on the website as well, and not just necessarily looking at the poverty element of it, but actually looking at a lot around the well-being, the COVID numbers. There's so much information on this, so it's just really to say this is a really useful tool that I think that a lot of a lot of us probably in this table here, and a lot of organisations, I will probably direct towards this as well, because there's some real interesting information out there that we can really capture for it. So whether it be through the wellbeing work that we're doing, or just whether we're doing it on a sort of daily basis for organisations as well, as some fantastic stuff in here. So just wanted to point that out, really.
Thank you very much. And Anna's said it already, but I'll reiterate it, that on the poverty side, or even kind of more generally, if there's data or there's themes that you're trying to understand more about, come and talk to us, because a lot of our work is very much about how can we help you make better use of data. And if that means that we put it into a dashboard, put it into something that makes it more accessible for you, so that you can kind of get those insights and do something with it, because that's where you guys are focused, then please come and talk to us, because the more that our work enables you to do that, then we're meeting our kind of objectives as an organisation, because it's all about kind of giving you guys the information that you need. So yeah, do come in. If you've got any other ideas for dashboards or work that you want us to get involved in, then we are here to help.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Brilliant, thank you.
Okay, well, thanks both so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Really, really good to see your tool and learn about it in more detail. And it already seems like, you know, it's clearly of great value to PSBs. And it was also really useful to hear about the other dashboards and sources of data that you mentioned. I'll just add one to that, which is the Co-op's Community Wellbeing Index, which goes down to a local level, to a sort of lower layer super output area level. Probably draws on quite a lot of the same data as your dashboard, but perhaps some other sources. So that might be useful for PSBs too. But I'm going to hand over now to Rob to talk about the Ceredigion dashboard.
And good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much. Over the last couple of days, I've had a few technical issues, so I'm just going to turn my camera on for a second, and then once we put our dashboard on screen, if it's okay, I'll just leave it switched off while we're sharing. So give it a couple of seconds, and our dashboard should start to appear on your screen. Just while that's happening, just one kind of caveat up front, really, with our dashboard, and that is that we're not actually experts in poverty. We're very much in the same sort of position as you are. So we're at the point of just trying to make sense of the data and use it to actually drive the work of the poverty subgroup. And I suspect we're all very much in the same sort of position with that. Now, that being said, we have actually had the dashboard in place for about 2 years now, and we're very much on a journey and moving forward with that. And we've picked up quite a lot along the way, and hopefully there's going to be something here which you will find useful. We don't have a whole lot of time, so we're going to go at a fair pace, but I will say up front, because this is a closed system, so this is not built in Power BI, this is actually built in a different system. If anyone is particularly keen to do their own thing and wants to unpick some of the things in here in more detail, then obviously please say, and maybe we can arrange something outside. I'll just put that offer on the table up front. In terms of the technical side of it, this is actually built in our performance system. So this is built in the County Council's performance system called InPhase. So the front end isn't quite as flashy and as whizzy as what you can create in the likes of Power BI and Tableau and those sorts of systems. But the bit where it does particularly well is actually getting data into the dashboard. It has a great range of connectors, and using APIs is pretty straightforward. So we have about 80 to 85% of the data that we have in here is being poured in automatically. And it's coming in from the usual sorts of sources, very same sources that our colleagues at Data Cymru have been using. So NOMIS is a good one, that works well. Stats Wales, Stat Explore, which is the DWP's system, the Land Registry and UK Government Department all work pretty well. The ONS tends to be a little bit hit and miss. It does depend on what particular data you're interested in. So some will work well, some of it you won't be able to pull in automatically. So because of that, we do have some manual measures in here, and that is deliberate so that we keep everything together, in one place, in one dashboard. So we'll have a quick look at some of the screens then. The claimant count is a good one. I think that was mentioned a bit earlier. We've been very interested in this one throughout the whole pandemic period, and pretty much everyone, I think, has seen quite a stark increase since the beginning of the pandemic. What we had seen from about April last year was a sustained decrease. But it's interesting, in this measure and in a number of other similar sorts of measures, we're actually starting to see in the last few months a slight increase again. And that could be the first indications of the impact of the cost of living crisis. We're also taking quite a keen interest in certain groups who are considered to be disproportionately affected. For us, one of those groups are younger people, so we're very keen to look at youth unemployment. So we've been looking at things like the claimant count and unemployment rates for younger people. And the reason for that is because of the size of our tourism industry. A lot of young people, not exclusively, but a lot of them do tend to work in seasonal, temporary type employment. And of course, during the pandemic, 97% of tourism-related businesses across Wales were closed, and therefore there was bound to be a massive impact. And this is something that we're seeing is actually continuing now with the cost of living crisis. We also have this situation in Ceredigion where a lot of younger people actually move out of the county because they're interested in career opportunities and social opportunities elsewhere. So, looking at youth as a group is is quite an important thing for us. We're also pulling in quite a lot of data from the land registry in relation to house prices and what's happening there. And if you've been following this, and I bet a lot of you have, you'll know just how much house prices have increased, particularly during the pandemic period. And for our colleagues in Pembrokeshire and Carmarthenshire and Anglesey, those on the west coast, then you'll be well aware of of the increases that we've seen. Ceredigion, for example, has seen an almost 39% increase in property prices. And of course, what this means is it just puts this extra pressure on the housing market that was already there anyway. And you can see that coming through in the housing affordability figures, which you can get from the ONS. The housing affordability ratio, and some of you may or may not be aware of this, the ratio is the ratio between house prices and earnings. So the higher it goes, the less affordable properties are. Ours has started to increase again, and so has a lot of everyone else's. So this is something that has become a very big political issue in Ceredigion and in West Wales just generally. And if you were to look at the increases in house prices across the nation as a whole, you'll actually see they are much higher than over the border in England. So the whole issue of housing affordability is rapidly going up the agenda and becoming a very, very big issue for us. In terms of sort of monitoring some of the impacts of that, then, we also pull in data in relation to possession claims. So possession claims are the first legal step in the process to repossession. And I've always felt that this one is quite a good measure, and it's available on a quarterly basis from the Ministry of Justice. And what's interesting about this is that in the last month, we have actually started to see an increase in Ceredigion. The numbers have jumped up quite noticeably. And when you drill into the data, you actually find that it's not to do with mortgage claims, it's actually to do with landlord claims, specifically private sector. So private sector rents is actually becoming quite an area of interest at the moment. Now it could be that the increase that we've seen are the figures going back to where they were pre-pandemic levels, or it could be the first signs of the impact of the cost of living crisis coming through in the data. It's difficult to tell just yet, but there's more than just some anecdotal evidence to suggest that there are issues around private sector rents at the moment. So just a couple of other things then we wanted to throw in. We obviously bring in the WIMD data as well. One of the things that Anna mentioned was the latest data from the census. And some of you might remember the deprivation dimensions. It's not quite as detailed as WIMD, but it is much more up to date. And one of the things that was mentioned in the Audit Wales report that we were talking about was the need to use much more up-to-date data, because wind is beginning to fall away a bit now. Now, we've only just started to look at this and try and get our head around it, but it is already beginning to throw up some very interesting things and help us to question what we thought we knew about deprivation. And it's showing some differences between this and wind, which is quite interesting. And then households living in poverty. So we look at household incomes. And this is the one which really helps us just to challenge what we thought we knew. If any of you know your geography, you'll know that there is an area in the north of Cardigan called Ceredigion. And we'd always been under the assumption that our single most deprived area was the Tavy area, which is the area to the south of the river. And it's interesting, just by delving into lower level geography, just how much you can find out, because in fact, it's the Ceredigion area where we have by far the single lowest household incomes across the whole of the county. And slightly more than half of households are actually below 60% of the median household income. And it puts a completely different slant on what we thought we knew. And as a result of that, that's given rise to us doing a deep dive into this area, just to try and get behind some of this data and some of these figures, and just try and answer some of those questions. Well, why is that? What's happening? And that's something that we are piloting at the moment. I think somebody also mentioned digital connectivity earlier as well. We're pulling in a few different bits of data here from Ofcom, from the National Survey for Wales, and from elsewhere. And we've been able to pull together a little bit of a picture as to what's happening. And this is actually driven by the primarily by the pandemic, because at that time, of course, lots of people were isolating, and traditionally, we've always had a very low proportion of households with internet access and a low proportion of people who actually use the internet. What we've actually seen over the last 2 years, we've actually seen a reversal of that. So now we actually have a higher than average proportion of people who actually use the internet and have access. But the issue we have identified is in relation to digital skills. And we haven't just relied on the National Survey for Wales here. I think with all surveys, normal kind of caveats apply when working with the data. We've obviously triangulated this with some of our colleagues in Citizens Advice and the college and so on. And there's been some digital skills training has been run over the last couple of months, and there's some more planned going forward. And we ended up having quite an interesting conversation at the last poverty subgroup about this, as to whether digital connectivity or not should be part of the group's remit. And it's a good question. How far do you stray away from pure poverty? But if you read the Audit Wales report, they actually talk about digital exclusion in there. About just how important it is to tackle that, because the data that they've seen shows that people in poverty can find it difficult to access online services. So, it kind of justifies, I think, the inclusion in all of our dashboards. Just very quickly, then, a couple of others. We've also started to bring in community safety related data, which you can get from police.uk, and this actually came at the request of a local head teacher in one of our schools, because they were under the perception that crime had actually started to go up. So by pulling in the data, and there's a playable map there, we can actually play that, and you can see over time, you can see whether the different incidents are taking place. We were able to demonstrate that the actual number of crimes committed hadn't increased, but there were groupings in specific locations, in and around this school. So we were able to kind of unpick that a little bit for them. And to be honest, I'd not really thought a whole lot about community safety in relation to poverty previously. So that was quite an interesting piece of work to do. Economic activity, very similar measures here. Everyone's going to be familiar with these. What I think this gives rise to is some extra evidence to suggest that in our part of the world, in-work poverty is increasingly rearing its head again. It was something that first came up in the original assessment of local wellbeing that we did 5 years ago. It came up again when we did the second one, published about 6 months ago. And there does increasingly seem to be the evidence to back up the fact that in work poverty is definitely something that is definitely there with us. I think also it flags up the kind of multi-dimensional nature of poverty. There's lots of different things to think about. Child poverty was one that was mentioned previously, in work poverty, and so on. So there's a lot of different aspects, I think, to pull together. Talking of child poverty, the End Child Poverty Coalition, you can't pull this in automatically, but getting it in the dashboard we found has been very useful. The Ceredigion poverty subgroup are very interested in this at the moment. And if it's big enough to see on your screens, you can probably see in the line chart at the bottom, and this is showing the whole of West Wales. So you've got Carmarthenshire, Ceredigion and Pembrokeshire. You can see quite a clear trend happening there. You can see the increase over the last couple of years. And the value of this, I think, was kind of demonstrated to us a couple of years ago when they published their first round of figures. And we actually got caught out, and it hit the front page news of local newspapers and sort of so on, and lots of questions were being asked, and we weren't quick enough off the block, I think, to answer them effectively. This time round, by having it in the dashboard, by being aware of what's happening, we can help to kind of manage the messages and take whatever action that we need to. And I will just throw in, they are incredibly helpful. So a lot of these organizations where you might think, you've got no chance of actually getting permission to use their data, it's surprising how many of them are actually very, very helpful and very keen for you just to go ahead, use it, because it helps their cause at the end of the day. And then just one or two more. We did a piece of work a little while ago about food banks. So we did a sort of a mapping exercise just to try and look at the coverage of the food banks that exist in the Ceredigion area. Of course, if you cast your minds back to the pandemic, lots of people were isolating and so on. There was the fear of, loss of income, loss of jobs and sort of so on. And we're still facing very much the same sort of situation now, as Anna suggested earlier. So I think this piece of work is just as relevant now in cost of living as it was during the pandemic. And we were able to just link in with our GIS system, and we could identify exactly where the gaps were. And there is one main gap just to the east of Newcastle Emlyn, right down on the border with Carmarthenshire. And the long and the short of this was there was a conversation between the different food banks, and they were able to agree that if somebody from those areas needed to access the food bank, they would of course be covered and they would be picked up. So although we can say that 99% of the county is covered by food banks, in reality nobody would be left out, and that's the kind of positive result that we wanted. And we were also able to make contact with the local ward councillors and just put them in in tune with the situation, so they could advertise make sure they advertise the food banks on their Twitter feeds or however they communicated with the people in their ward. And then one very last one, we're just increasingly beginning to look at public opinion. And some of you may have been following some of the measures that Welsh Government were recording during the pandemic. And I really like the measure when they ask people, how concerned are you about your ability to pay your bills 1 month from now? Because you can see a very clear trend where it goes up to about 47%, so just under half during the height of the pandemic. It begins to trail off as the restrictions are eased and the pandemic is behind us. And then all of a sudden, you start to see it begin to go up again. Unfortunately, they're no longer recording that now. But there is some data you can get from the National Survey for Wales around keeping up for bills. Some of this is obviously based on national data, so it can't go any lower than that. That being said, just for the sake of a few seconds, just a snapshot of what is happening and what's the kind of mood, at the moment, I think that can still be quite useful. And that really is all I was going to share with you. I think the benefits go way beyond just our sort of understanding of what's happening in relation to poverty. there's more to it than just that. I think it's helped us to really focus the group, the poverty subgroup, on the key areas that they need to. So it kind of gives some sort of boundaries, if you like, to the work of the group, which I think is really quite useful. We've also found that it's helped to drive certain activities. So, for example, we're planning a piece of work now around filling a data gap that exists in relation to adult numeracy and literacy, so working with the college. And also, don't underestimate the value of using this data for other purposes. So I think we've helped about 7 or 8 different funding bids over the last couple of years, some of which I know have been successful. And we've used a lot of data from the poverty dashboard. So, the benefits of having access to the data, I think, go way beyond just understanding, what's happening in your area in relation to poverty. What we don't do, of course, is blindly just use the dashboard and just plow ahead and undertake some actions. What we do is we do triangulate the data with our colleagues around the table. So we will do like a 10 or 15-minute presentation, give them the kind of headlines. We don't give them the answers. I work in the back office, so I don't deal with people coming in through the front door, but they do. So the citizens' advice can give us their take on it, and we can obviously then compare ideas and basically triangulate the evidence and formulate action as to what do we want to do about it. And then very finally, things to consider. I mean, I think there's a couple of things there. One is the sheer volume of data that you could look at. For us, it's been very useful to make decisions as we go on what measures you want to bring in. So, we've only scratched the surface. There is so much data out there. So I think a bit of planning and thinking up front probably works well. It certainly worked well for us. And the key thing, very final thing, is of course resource, because any dashboard that is created, somebody has to manage it, they have to build it, and of course somebody has to then be the data person to go in, analyze the data, interpret it, and then feed back to the group. And for my sins, that's my job. But so far, we've had some really positive feedback, and I think that's a bit longer than 15 minutes. But I hope there is something in there for everyone, and I hope there's something that you could take away. But as I say, if you want to know more, please get in touch. Thanks everyone for listening. Diolch.
Thanks very much, Rob. That was absolutely fascinating. And thank you for your kind offer to sort of answer any questions that people may have by email or through one-to-one discussions with you. We've got 13 minutes left, and I just want to kind of open it up to the room to see if really to find out kind of what the key insights are that you'll be taking away from today, and or if you have any kind of key outstanding questions about how you might use data to understand and address poverty in your local areas. So yeah, interested to hear your key insights that you're taking away from today and any outstanding questions you might have.
Really interested to hear your presentation, Rob, and thank you very much for that. We've been trying to bring about some sort of grasp of our data, particularly looking at Rhyl being one of the most deprived wards in Wales. We have mostly hit brick walls with it, though, probably because of the reason you've alluded to at the end of your presentation, where it's down to resource and capacity. You do need that sort of dedicated capacity to drive that sort of thing forward, to be refreshing the data, looking for the data, building the data. Can I just pry a little bit? Are you solely employed for that purpose in Ceredigion, or were you employed previously? How have you created that capacity in Ceredigion?
No, it's a fair question. It is a fair question, and I think it is one of the most important things to consider, because that could determine whether you wanted to kind of build your own thing, or maybe work with Anna and Suzanne in terms of developing the national view of poverty. I actually work in the performance and research team, so if I'm honest, it's only 1/3 of my role is actually on research and data. I come from a data background, so it's what I do anyway. But only 1/3 of it now is actually on research and data. But because I support the poverty subgroup, it naturally kind of came my way. And if I'm honest, we've just kind of created the capacity. but I wouldn't be under any illusions. There is quite a bit of work there. Not just the kind of building. Once it's set up and running, there is quite a bit of an investment in terms of going in, just having a trawl through. That probably takes, if you do it properly, probably a couple of hours. Get your head around it, prepare your presentation, do the presentation. So there is a bit of a commitment there, I think. But I suppose the plus side is having the data to hand rather than having to spend time going and getting the data. You can maximize the amount of time you actually spend doing the analysis, which is the bit that I kind of love. I got sick to death, frankly, of going away, getting the same data and updating, manual dashboards and things. So it depends what works for you and what kind of resource you've got available, I think.
Yeah, I mean, the thing we lack in Denbighshire actually is a dedicated research team. We don't have that anymore. Went several austerity movements ago, but we have obviously performance officers, but no capacity. Something to think about. Thank you.
Thanks, Yolo. That was a useful question, and to find out a little bit more about the nuts and bolts and practicalities of actually making your dashboard work, Rob. Thank you. I think we have a comment or question from Jenny.
Hiya. So yeah, I'm from the Future Generations Office, so my question might be a bit predictable. But I just wanted to ask, and I saw Fatima had asked something similar, but I just wondered if there was a potential to use this data to sort of look at how these different issues intersect with different protected characteristics. The most recent iteration of the Future Inequalities in the Future Wales has kind of shown sort of intersection between things like poverty, digital exclusion, climate change, and how these trends are impacting some people more than others. And I just wondered whether that was coming through in the data or whether there was the ability to kind of have a look at those. And I know that some protected characteristics have more data than others. So I know that the census data is only just starting to collect data, I think, on gender identity and things. But yeah, that was my main question.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on which characteristic, doesn't it? I mean, some of them are, there's plenty of data for, and there'll be no problems bringing that in. Some of them, like sexual orientation, we've always had a problem getting data on that. Hopefully some of that's going to be filled in now with the publication of the census data. I suspect even beyond that, we're still going to have a lot of questions that we'll want to answer. There would be absolutely no problem doing that in this form of dashboard. I think it comes back to the earlier question about, the capacity and resources, and somebody to kind of own it and be the kind of expert, if you like, and make sure it actually happens. And I think therein possibly lies the, the ultimate value of the national dashboard, because we can all kind of work together and all benefit from 19 PSBs around the table.
Susie and Anna, do you want to respond to that question at all?
I haven't got anything to add unless you've got anything to add to that.
I was going to say exactly the same thing, but I just hearing Rob and kind of saying, that there are opportunities to work on this dashboard, I would echo that, and absolutely, if we can kind of support that, I'm more than happy to.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any final questions or comments on either of the presentations or the sort of, question of how to use and apply data to address poverty more broadly? Okay, so I just want to highlight a few key points that I'll be taking away from today to try and sum up a bit. I think, clearly there's a huge amount of data out there, so that's one of the big challenges, figuring out which is most relevant to your particular objectives in your local areas, and kind of connected to that, there's a huge amount of data, but it's not all super up to date. So learning about kind of new or different or innovative sources of data, I think, is particularly useful to try and plug some of those gaps. And I think Rob, you're absolutely right that sort of one of the key questions for us to think more about is how we can actually apply this data and turn it into action, into kind of actionable insights to support your work on the ground. I think I really liked your examples, Rob, of where data is being used to kind of interrogate sort of ideas that are sometimes not as evidence-based as we think they are about who might be in poverty or which areas might be suffering from the most acute poverty. So I think that's kind of one of the most obvious and really useful ways that the data can be used to inform our understanding and therefore our action. So we're kind of considering whether it might be useful to run a follow-up session on how we can plug those gaps in the data availability, and what sources of kind of local intelligence can be generated and gathered and shared to plug some of those gaps. For example, like the citizens' advice example that Susie and Anna shared. So if any PSBs on the call have particular kind of unanswered questions or ideas for follow-up sessions, then please do feel free to share those with us either in the chat or via email. I think there's only two further things to say. One is that the recording of this session will be shared via email with you, I think week commencing 21st of November. And then lastly, we're going to just put up a little poll survey now to get a little bit of kind of snapshot feedback from you. So the question is, how far has this session addressed and kind of met your expectations for the session? So if you could answer that before you leave, that would be really, really helpful. And just finally, thank you for all of our speakers today and also for everybody for attending. And we'll leave it there. Thanks, everyone.